How's everybody doing? My name is Mark. Most gamers are familiar with Capcom's Devil May Cry franchise. The first game came out in 2001 on the PlayStation 2 and is considered by many to be a classic. Famous for not only being a great game, but also being the first spectacle fighter. Though I'm not sure if the term was being used at the time, it pioneered a new breed of action games. I was actually a teenager when this first came out and bought it soon after release. Memories of purchasing the game are hazy at best. I probably saw it advertised, or maybe somebody at school told me about it, but in any case, it left a lasting impression. As you would expect, I've played it for this video, but even before that I had fairly strong memories. That's probably because I'd never played anything like it. Nobody had. It had fast-paced fight scenes, the camera was usually perfectly positioned to frame the action, and the best part, we were in control. Not to mention the main character was a total badass. Honestly though, some modern action flicks would do pretty well to take a page out of the Devil May Cry playbook. If zoomed in shaky cam isn't already dead, it probably should be. Anyway, it was a critical and commercial success, so it makes total sense that Capcom would follow it up with a sequel. In August of 2003, the highly anticipated Devil May Cry 2 was released. And I didn't buy it. We're talking over 15 years ago, so I don't know why after having such a great time with the first game, I wouldn't feel compelled to play the second. But with the HD collection having come out on Steam in 2018, it felt like a good time to have a look at what I passed up.
Well, what have we here?
Do you have to ask?
I really do. What about Devil May Cry 2? It's not always fair to compare one thing to another. It's of course possible to judge DMC2 on its own merits, but so much of my reaction was based on expectations set by the original, so it does seem appropriate to see how it stacks up against the first game. There are two playable characters in DMC2, Dante and Lucia. I picked Dante and it started promisingly enough. We open with a cutscene that shows a woman in a museum getting ambushed by vulture demons. Dante quickly crashes through the ceiling window and makes short work of them while in midair. It's cool, don't get me wrong, but the brief exchange between the two makes me think something's a little off.
You called?
Till next time, son of Sparta.
What? He's only got the one line, and the delivery is really dry. I know it's early, but Dante strikes me as sedated. I thought he was being built up a bit, but no, he's like that the whole game. In fact, at times he appears to not want to be there at all.
Did you find what you were looking for?
Yes. Now we can stop Arius's ambition.
Whatever.
The first game doesn't have a ton of dialogue either, more than the second for sure. But when there is a cutscene, Dante seems like a totally different character. Check out the opening bit of the first game.
Whoa, slow down, babe. Well, what do we have here? Nature calls? It's in the back.
So, you must be the handyman who'll take any dirty job. Am I correct?
Almost. I only take special jobs, if you know what I mean.
You're the man who lost a mother and a brother to evil 20 years ago. The son of the legendary Dark Knight Sparta, Mr. Dante.
Well, the way I figure it, in this business a lot of your kind comes around. And if I kill each one that comes, eventually I should hit the jackpot sooner or later.
In that case, you should be used to this sort of thing.
Are you really the son of the legendary Dark Knight Sparta? Didn't your daddy teach you how to use a sword?
Sword. Time to go to work, guys.
Even as a child, I had powers. There's demonic blood in me. You were the first one to know about my vengeance. Looks like I'm getting closer.
He's a cool, compelling character right out of the gate. He's cocky and a bit of a chauvinist, and you get he's something more than human. You know, what with the sword lodged in him that he barely acknowledges except to pull it out of himself. He also says he has demon blood, but you know what I mean. Dante's motivations for hunting demons is clearly stated here. His mother and brother were murdered by a demon, though he doesn't know by who. He hopes to eventually find the one who did and get revenge.
In that case.
Unfortunately and fortunately, both opening scenes give you a pretty good idea of how their respective games are. Like I said before, you can play as Lucia as well. I've read that people complain you couldn't play as Trish in the first game, so they added Lucia to address this. Why not just have Trish? And where the hell is she anyway? She survives the first game. We also learn later, at the same time Lucia does, that she's an artificially created demon made by the antagonist Arius. Though this revelation doesn't exactly come as a surprise, not that I saw it coming, but it's just that she's not an engaging enough character for me to empathize with. We don't even spend that much time getting to know her. I'm not suggesting either game, or the whole series for that matter, is known for its deep characters, but at least the first game does a little bit to establish its characters. Trish and Lucia are pretty similar. Trish is created by the villain of the first game, Mundus, except here it actually serves some kind of purpose. She'd been working for Mundus the whole time and acting like an ally to Dante. She turns on Dante, but soon after he saves her from some falling rubble, which ultimately brings them together. Is it contrived? Yeah, but at least it's something. With Lucia, you could remove the origins of her creation and it wouldn't change much. Alright, so what about the villains? In DMC2 we have Arius. He's the president of an international corporation who's made an arrangement with a demon named Argisax. Argisax is, I think, granting Arius some of his power. Arius already has a demon army at his disposal and is capable of making these femme fatale demons. Argisax is trying to come to Earth, but needs Arius to gather 4 items in order to open a portal. So what's Arius' goal?
Try to take over the world.
Why? Who knows? He doesn't make for a very strong villain, honestly. In fairness though, Mundus is pretty archetypical as well, but he's at least a bit more memorable. He's getting ready to leave the underworld and come to Earth, and his plan? Yep, take over the world. Why? Well, why not, I guess. He's got a cool design though. He's a large Greek-like statue, but this isn't actually his true form. He's really a fully mobile Greek-like statue with wings. They do make an effort to connect him with Dante. As it turns out, Mundus is the one who murdered his mother and brother. Dante deduces this fact somehow. I do appreciate that they're telling a contained story here. There aren't any loose ends, but it might have been cool if Dante had been wrong about this. His personal motives could have remained intact going into future games, but the developers couldn't have known this was going to turn into a giant franchise.
Dante, I will return, and I will rule this world!
So look, I know we're not talking Shakespeare here. The characters and story in the original are stronger than in DMC2, but in both games they basically just serve as a framework or a vessel for the gameplay to take place in. Any missteps in those departments could be forgiven if the game is just fun to play. So, let's get into the meat of it. Just a note here before we continue, I played both games on normal difficulty. Now, let's talk more about the first game, Devil May Cry. You'll be tearing your way through groups of demons while the camera captures the stylish action in a way that lets you admire your handiwork. There aren't many moves available at the beginning of the game, but as you progress, you purchase more and better attacks by spending red orbs, the game's currency, acquired by killing demons, smashing objects, or just finding them lying around. Everyone knows the best place to store your crystallized demon blood is in a barrel, naturally. New moves aren't the only thing you can buy though. You can get consumables such as healing items and blue crystals, which increase your life bar. Purchases can be made right before missions or during a mission at half-lion, half-human statues that are holding an hourglass. Because, of course. I should also mention the dodge mechanic. You can do a quick roll to the side in order to get out of a pinch. But you'll quickly realize that aggression is highly incentivized, and the best way to achieve that is cool new attacks. That alone might be enough to encourage you to employ your full arsenal of combos while fighting enemies, but the game also rewards you for it. Your performance in combat is judged with a grading system. D for dull is what you'll start out with, but you can quickly build it up to S, which stands for stylish. Thankfully, this is made as easy as possible due to smooth, responsive controls that are easy to get the hang of, for the most part. It's clear the developers did everything they could to give you the best angle possible through which to view the action. But there are times when you're in tighter environments when the camera does appear to be working against you. One especially frustrating moment I had with this came during a late game boss fight. The arena is small and the boss takes up most of it. I found it difficult to see what I was doing at times. It also wasn't uncommon for Dante to become obscured by the larger boss. The second issue is a targeting problem. You have to hit these plates on the sides of the arena in order to transform the boss and expose his weak point. There's this auto-lock mechanic, and the vast majority of the time it works great. But here, sometimes when I want to hit the weak point, Dante targets the plates instead. I died a couple of times because of this. It's not a huge deal in an otherwise great game, but it's worth noting anyways. You are likely to die a handful of times in this game though. During a first play especially, it's almost a guarantee. Not because of unfair things. For the most part, the difficulty feels just right. The game presents a stiff challenge that still cuts you some slack. Gold orbs, which revive you, can be found occasionally, and green orbs that restore your health are a fairly common drop. The game is tough but fair, and it's a ton of fun. DMC goes some way to fixing that targeting complaint. It carries over the lock-on mechanic, but it lets you switch targets with a button press. Controls are tight as before. The dodge mechanic has also received some attention. You can now briefly run along the walls or run up a wall, flip off it, and get the drop on an enemy. It's pretty cool actually, and these are welcome additions. As you progress, however, you're gonna find yourself wondering, when do I get all the badass attacks and weapons? Well, your first clue might come when you check the upgrade section right before a mission. What you find is the ability to level up weapons, but leveling them up only gives you a generic damage increase. But maybe this isn't necessarily telling of the rest of the game. After all, the original didn't introduce the really cool attacks until you get the lightning sword, so maybe the good stuff is still coming? About 2 hours in, you'll pick up this. It's described as a decorative sword. Initially I thought this was a key item. You know, the items you collect to, for all intents and purposes, open doors? And can you blame me given the unceremonious way you get it? In the first game you actually get a key item that's also described as a decorative sword. But no, the Vendetta is an equipable weapon. So what crazy new attacks does this weapon bring to the table? Nothing. Same as your default sword, leveling it up only increases its damage. I believe it also has the same combo as the starting sword too. If there's a difference I didn't notice. I found a third sword as well, but it's basically the same deal. So we've encountered the first and major real problem in this game. All the new flashy attacks are gone. That's a huge one. That really can't be overstated. Let's talk about weapons in Devil May Cry. Getting one is a pretty big deal. Just watch this. God, that's awesome. Getting the Alistair opens up the combat in a meaningful way. It's an objective upgrade over the default sword damage-wise, but that's the least of it. All those cool attacks I talked about earlier, this is where it starts. You get it about 45 minutes in, and from here on out, you're tearing through demons in brutal, stylish fashion. It's at this point you unlock Devil Trigger mode. When activated, Dante gets a huge boost in power. It's not just his attack damage, there are also special moves that you can only use well in this mode, including shooting lightning bolts while flying and spiraling through the air into enemies. Later you get the fire gauntlets. Dante's fighting style is totally different, but it's still completely satisfying as you beat enemies into a pulp. They also come with a unique Devil Trigger moveset. The third weapon you get is the Sparta, Dante's father's Sparta's weapon. Yeah. Did this guy name the sword after himself? Anyway, it's a sword that would make Cloud Strife jealous. This thing looks pretty cool in action, but it doesn't come with a Devil Trigger mode. That'll come up again later though. The second game has a Devil Trigger mode as well, but it isn't tied to weapon pickups this time around. I like this change from a character standpoint. It's a power that's built into Dante, making him feel inherently more powerful. But again, there's no extra abilities, so it's largely just a massive damage jump. Over the course of the game, you collect gemstones that fit into an amulet. How the amulet was acquired is never explained though. These gems are used to modify Devil Trigger mode and come in 3 categories. Movement, as you might guess, gives you the option to fly or increase run speed. Elemental lets you change your attack to fire or lightning, but I can actually never tell if there was a difference aside from the visual effects. The third category lets you pick between damage up or healing while in Devil Trigger mode. Some of these are useful, but they're not all that interesting. So, movesets and Devil Trigger are a hollow shell of the first game, but how about the enemies? Well, some of them aren't badly designed. The skeletons are made a bit more visually interesting with giblets for armor, plus they have a variety of weapons they can use. These golem guys lose chunks off their body the more you hit them. Their legs run away, and if you don't finish them off, they regenerate entirely. There's a good variety of demons to fight. Foggy frog dudes, goat guys, vultures, and bats. Flying enemies are annoying though. You can stay on the ground and gun them down easily enough, but you can't see them a lot of the time. But the real problem is the difficulty. You don't rely on quick reflexes and learning enemy patterns to get through combat. The army of the damned this time around are a legion of brainless goons. Yeah, the AI is terrible. I don't think I died once to regular enemies. Sometimes they don't even attack you when you're standing right there. At one point you encounter a pair of wolves. I was fighting them, but then I realized they're just following a pattern and not really going for Dante. I put the controller down and did nothing just to see if this last guy would target Dante, and sure enough, he didn't. The result? The game is so easy, and for the most part, you'll just be hitting the same button over and over and over. No encounters in the first game are painfully difficult, but they don't need to be. That's not the point. They're typically challenging, but it's the right level of challenge. Enemies are aggressive and have patterns you can learn. Some are tougher than others, but you're given the tools you need to beat them. The difficulty escalates at a reasonable pace. The first ones you face are these marionette guys, and they go down pretty easily. From there, it ramps up with more interesting enemies. Reaper-looking dudes with giant scissors, shadow panthers that change shape, armored lizard folks, and giant insects, to name a few. They have cool designs and are fun to fight. I will say though, I like the health bar in DMC2 better than the first game. It's just slicker looking, a bit smaller, and the Devil Trigger meter is easier to read compared to those glyphs from the first game. It's a small thing, but worth mentioning, I think. Fighting regular dudes is one thing, but it's time to take a look at the bosses. In Devil May Cry, these fights are often the highlight of the game. The first one you run into is foreshadowed. Earlier, you find a bunch of these tiny lava spiders, and you just step on them, despite me swinging at them in this footage. Anyway, shortly after that, the actual threat drops down on you in the form of a gigantic, molten-blooded, trash-talking scorpion. And how do you kill it? You stab it in the face, of course. Thankfully, it's not that easy, though. I died several times to this guy before taking him down. Once you figure out how it's done, you can probably kill him every single time. All the bosses are like that, well designed both visually and mechanically. One boss that stands out for me is Nightmare. It might have sounded like I was disparaging this guy a little earlier, and I kinda was, but the fight is really neat though. It starts out looking like a pool of sludge that can't be hit. You strike these plates on the sides of the arena that causes it to transform. Seeing that for the first time is a pretty cool moment. Even exposing its true form though doesn't allow you to unleash all your attacks on him. He's got a weak point that relocates every few seconds. All the while he's using a barrage of defensive measures attempting to keep you at bay. But you have to continue hitting the plates. If you don't, Nightmare turns back into slime. Furthermore, if you step into the slop, you get sucked down into another dimension where you have to fight a bunch of skulls and one of the other bosses. It's a wild confrontation for sure. The other boss I want to talk about is this Demon Knight. The fight itself is a fun sword battle and a welcome diversion from going head to head with giant monsters. When you defeat him for the final time, you discover his true identity. Turns out this is actually Dante's brother Virgil. I guess Mundus must have retrieved his soul and twisted it to his purposes. You also fight a large bird. It's a fun fight, but the weakest of the bunch in my opinion. You can easily criticize the game for reusing bosses here. You fight each one of them 3 times. It doesn't bother me too much, I guess though. It does feel very much like they're hounding you throughout the game, and ending them for good is satisfying. Unfortunately, the same can't be said for DMC2. At this point, you're probably sensing a pattern. The boss encounters here aren't the worst I've ever seen, but they're not great either. I'm not sure what to say about this assemblage of mediocre encounters. They're just bland and go down pretty easily. There's a larger variety than the first game, but they're just not nearly as memorable. Even when you fight the lava scorpion from the first game, it's still just not nearly as intense. He's weaker and can be hit from any angle. The original can only be hit in the head, which is often guarded. The only reason I use devil triggers to end these fights a little bit faster, honestly. The egregious example is the tank bosses. If you stay on the ground close to them, they can't hit you at all. Now there are 3 of them, so the other ones can hit you, but even then, it's still just a simple matter to dodge the incoming shells. It's a boring, uninspired fight, which can be said of all the boss encounters, whether we're talking about the gorilla demon, someone's hentai fantasy, or these helicopters. The vast majority of Devil May Cry takes place in and around the castle. The castle feels like a character in and of itself. You get the impression evil is just emanating from the architecture like it's possessed, which makes sense since the place is inhabited by demons. That quality only escalates as you get closer to opening the portal to the underworld. It's just so well designed. The lighting, camera angles, and music are working together to achieve this ambience. The devs were clearly looking at real castles for inspiration. It feels like a castle that could exist. Perhaps being able to picture myself walking around in there adds to the unease the game offers. The blueprint is complex, but easily navigated. There is a detailed map in case you get lost, but you may only reference it occasionally. The environments and camera angles are varied enough to keep you oriented. The way in which you move through and interact with the environment is clearly influenced by Resident Evil. There are locked doors and your objectives are typically to get the keys to get through the doors. That sounds lame, I know, but it's everything surrounding the get the keys to the locks that makes it great. Let's talk about the levels and environments in DMC2. Many of them are a lot more open and spacious than the first, but this presents a problem. Because the environments are bigger, the camera is pulled back much farther. As a result, we're seeing the action at a greater distance, and it's a lot harder to get invested in it. The levels themselves are much more linear and segmented, which isn't necessarily a bad thing at all. There are more locations as the game takes place over a larger area. It starts off in a small cliffside town which leads to an ancient temple. You then go to a ruined but modern looking city before heading into Arias' headquarters. It could have worked really well. Unfortunately, it feels like they needed a couple more coats of paint. They just aren't very interesting. There is one part though that isn't merely dull. During Lucia's campaign, there is a swimming section, and I found it more than annoying. The controls are no good. As far as I can tell, there's no way to descend except just to wait. The worst part by far though, and not just in the swimming section, in the whole game, is this room with the skulls. There are orbs placed at different elevations, and you have to hit them to make the platforms appear so you can progress. They need to be hit within a certain amount of time. You can't actually target the orbs though using the lock-on system, so if the skulls are there, Lucia will swing in their direction. So you have to kill the skulls before this can be done, but they respawn about every 30 seconds. Obviously it can be done, but the controls and the skulls make this needlessly frustrating. There's a swimming section in the first game too, and it's probably the weakest part of the game, but it doesn't even approach the levels of frustration I felt with the second. Anyway, the levels are mostly dull and sometimes just unpleasant to look at. The example that comes to mind is the town at the beginning of the game. It just looks like staring at a brown screen. It makes the first game look like a burst of sunshine. In Devil May Cry, you unlock the gate to the underworld, you head down there and battle demons on their home turf. This culminates in the showdown with Mundus. Devil Trigger mode is unlocked for the Sparta, transforming Dante into the likeness of his father. Mundus takes to the air and Dante follows. By the way, Sparta could take on a human form. Like, I don't think he had relations with Dante's mom looking like this, probably. The ensuing fight is a total departure from the rest of the game. It's a third-person bullet hell shooter. You bring him down by firing what I assume are Japanese characters. Totally normal. When you have enough Devil Trigger charges, you hit him with your big attack. A giant energy beam would have fit the bill, but no. You shoot him with a giant dragon. Why? I don't know, but it's awesome. The second phase is a more standard affair. Mundus is stationary in the middle of the arena launching projectiles at you. You're forced into using the Sparta, which I don't love, but anyway. It's a fairly easy fight, especially since I cheesed it. If you've got a bunch of Devil Stars, consumables that fill your Devil Trigger gauge, now might be the time to use them. You can be killed pretty quickly this way. If you want to keep it an epic climactic fight, don't do this. Overall though, it's a great final fight. To DMC2's credit, it's got separate boss battles for Dante and Lucia, but one of them is a silly and frustrating fight, and the other is way too easy. Dante once again heads into the underworld to square off against Argasax. We're greeted by a conglomeration of all the bosses. The bird boss from the first game is there too. He's parked in the center of the arena and the goal is to kill each segment represented by one of the previously fought bosses. This sounds like a great idea in theory, but in practice, it's just a mess. The biggest problem is that you can't get close enough to attack with your sword without taking hits. I tried it. If it can be done reliably, I'd be happy to be corrected. This leaves you with your other option, gunning it down. This takes a long time and is tedious as hell, no pun intended. The second problem is the way the targeting works. You can't target a segment unless you're within a certain cone, even if you have clear line of sight and would otherwise be within range. Thing is, they can still shoot at you when you're in a position when you should be able to hit them, but can't because the rules are changed for this fight. And I get it, it would be too easy otherwise. You would just stand outside their range and blast them. But if you have to bend the rules to make the fight a challenge, it's probably a clumsily designed fight. I died a number of times on this fight before resigning myself to just shooting at it for what ended up being 20 minutes. The second phase, thankfully, is much better. It's a fast-paced battle that'll have you dodging as much as attacking. The boss has patterns that can be learned and moves that are telegraphed just enough to give you a chance. Mercifully, if you die on the second phase, you don't have to go through the first phase again. Lucia stays behind but is confronted by Arius one last time. I gotta give this guy some credit. He can take a thorough beating. Earlier you fight him as both Dante and Lucia. He somehow survives being blasted through a skyscraper wall by Dante. And I love Arius' reaction to being defeated. Easily the best performance the game has to offer.
My dream! My life! I was going to be the king of this world!
King? Yeah. Here's your crown.
Anyway, he's back and all jacked up. There's just one problem. He's a total pushover. I didn't die once fighting this guy. It wasn't even a concern. Most of the time, he's just running at you and doing a belly flop or slapping at the air. Yeah, open-handed. Really rude. After you beat the crap out of him, he transforms. Again, though, it's really easy. Lucia's throwing knives do a lot of damage, and once your Devil Trigger meter is charged, you use that and keep hitting him with projectiles, you can take off about 3/4 of a health bar in just a few seconds. In total, it took me just over 5 minutes to finish both phases. It's just that easy. Devil May Cry is a masterpiece. It invented and to this day defines a genre. It's like playing an action movie while eating a ham and cheese sandwich. It never takes itself too seriously except for when it does, and even then, it still manages to be hammy. Who could forget this classic line?
I should have been the one to fill your dark soul with light!
Oh, I love that bit. It's not a particularly long game, but the replay value is really high for me. I clocked it in at about 6 hours, but thankfully when starting a new game on hard mode, you'll keep all your gear and upgrades from normal mode. During your first playthrough, it's unlikely you'll be able to purchase all the moves and upgrades, but a second time through, you probably will. In fact, you almost definitely will. If you're anything like me, another romp through the castle will be in order. Its follow-up, however, leaves much to be desired. Its true disadvantage is that if you played the first game, you know exactly what's missing, and that's to say that all the cool action and bombast. It really is Devil May Cry with all the characters sucked out. It took me just under 6 hours to beat it, but unlike the first game, I feel no compulsion to revisit this. On its own, it would be just a mediocre hack and slash game, but as a sequel, it's a complete letdown. It's by no means the worst game I've ever played. It had potential, but ultimately just ends up being a repetitive chore served up with a piece of multi-grain Melba toast. So, what happened? How did the follow-up to one of the best games of 2001 turn out to be such a letdown? Well, development for DMC2 started during localization for the first game, but the director of Devil May Cry, Hideki Kamiya, and his team, Little Devil, were not even asked to work on the second game. The reason for this is, as far as I know, a mystery, but Kamiya did say that he was surprised and disappointed by this. Actually, before I looked into this, I thought Team Little Devil came back for the third game, but no, they only made the first game. It's unknown who they originally brought on to direct Devil May Cry 2. However, between 4 and 5 months before development was supposed to be finished, he was swapped out for this guy, Hideki Insuno. Upon arrival, Insuno discovered that barely any work had been done. No story was written, so no cutscenes were shot. The movesets for Dante and Lucia hadn't been worked out. Supposedly someone was working on Dante's signature stinger move, which is in the game. It's pathetic when compared to the first game though, or any DMC for that matter. None of the bosses had been designed, very little enemy and environment work had been done. The idea from the beginning was to make a game that in every way upped the ante from the first one. Insuno's task then was to make a AAA game that was bigger in scale to the first one in about 5 months. Just for some context, development for the original Devil May Cry started in 1998. So what can you say? That it even turned out to be this good is proof enough of Insuno's talent. What's more though, he's directed every numbered Devil May Cry since, and happily, they're all great. Hell, even if he'd just come back for DMC3, considered by many to be the best in the franchise, that would have been enough of a comeback. But he's knocked it out of the park time and time again. We've seen what he's capable of when he starts a project from day one. He deserves a lot of credit, maybe especially for his work on DMC2. He was asked the impossible, but gave it his all regardless, and he continues to do so.
Sparta did come back.
I think that'll do it. But before I end the video, let me know in the comments section what sequels you were most disappointed by. I know I've got a few of my own, and I've just done a video about one, but I'd be happy to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching. My name has been Mark, and I will see you on the next one.